Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new explainer. Today, we're jumping into one of the most foundational, powerful, and frankly, kind of intimidating technologies in the entire IT world. I'm talking about Active Directory. But listen, we aren't just going to sit around and talk theory. We're going to explore exactly how to build a virtual lab from the ground up.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture a corporate network for a second. You've got a brand new company, maybe 5 employees. Setting up their computers, creating their passwords, getting them hooked up to the shared printer? Super easy, right? You just do it manually. But what happens when that company suddenly explodes to 500 employees or 5,000? Imagine the absolute nightmare scenario of having to literally walk to thousands of individual computers just to reset a forgotten password or install a basic software update. Yeah, no way. It's totally impossible. And that is exactly where Active Directory steps in as the absolute ultimate solution for centralized management.
So here is our roadmap for today so we don't get overwhelmed. 1. Meet Active Directory. 2. Building your virtual lab. 3. Installing Windows Server. 4. Domains, forests, and AD. 5. Structuring OUs and groups. And finally 6. Users and real-world access. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Meet Active Directory, the digital bouncer. So, Active Directory, or AD for short, is Microsoft's centralized identity management system. I honestly like to think of it as a mashup between a really strict digital bouncer and a dynamic company phone book. Just imagine a new employee joining a company on a Monday morning. They're going to need an email address, access to the shared finance drive, and permission to use, say, the third-floor printer. Well, instead of configuring all of this on 3 completely separate systems, the IT team just creates one single profile for this user right in Active Directory. AD acts as that bouncer, checking their ID at the door and then instantly granting them all the specific access they need across the entire network. Pretty cool, right?
Moving right along to Section 2, Building your virtual lab, the foundation.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the contrast. Back in the day, if you wanted to test a server, you had to actually go out and buy a massive, noisy, super expensive piece of physical hardware. But today, IT professionals rely entirely on virtualization. A virtual server is completely software-based. It literally tricks the software into thinking it's running on its own dedicated hardware. But really, it's just running inside a little window on your desktop. This is a real game changer because it means you can spin up 3 entirely different servers on your home laptop, test them, completely break them, and then just delete them, all without spending a single dime on new hardware. Creating one of these virtual machines, or VMs, is essentially like a digital construction project. You have to tell your virtualization software exactly how many resources to pull from your host computer. So step 1, you allocate the brainpower, that's the CPU and RAM. Step 2, you carve out a chunk of your hard drive for storage capacity. And Step 3, you link it all up with virtual networking so these VMs can actually talk to each other. This whole process directly mirrors real-world corporate resource planning. In reality, an organization has a finite amount of server power, and they really have to carefully divide it among the departments that need it most.
Okay, Section 3, Installing Windows Server, the framework. Now, to actually install our operating system, we use what's called an ISO file. Basically, this is just a digital replica of a physical installation CD or DVD. Microsoft actually provides free evaluation versions of their software in this exact format, specifically so we can set up these test labs without having to shell out for an expensive enterprise license.
Now, you might be wondering, why can't we just use standard Windows 10 or Windows 11? Well, desktop OSs are really tuned for foreground user productivity, stuff you do right in front of the screen. Windows Server, on the other hand, is engineered to run silently in the background. It's routing traffic, enforcing policies, and handling thousands of simultaneous connections. It is literally the heavy-duty engine of the corporate IT world.
And once Windows Server is installed, you don't just, leave it alone. You've got to perform some absolutely crucial setup actions. First up is setting up a highly secure administrator account. Next is server hardening, which basically means locking down all the unnecessary features so you prevent hacker attacks. And finally, enforcing strict naming conventions. Listen, in a massive corporate environment with hundreds of servers, you can't just name a server Dave's Cool Computer. You need strict standards like NY-DC01 for a New York domain controller. So any IT tech immediately knows exactly what that machine does just by looking at its name.
Let's jump into Section 4, Domains, Forests, and AD, the structure.
So when you install Active Directory on a Windows server, that server actually gets a promotion. It officially becomes a domain controller. Now, I know that sounds like an intimidating term, but it really just means this specific server is now the ultimate boss of the network. It's the machine holding the master database. When a user types in their password on their laptop, that laptop asks the domain controller, "Hey, is this the right password?" The domain controller then processes that authentication request and enforces the security policies across the whole company. So, the crucial point here is how this whole architecture scales up. Microsoft actually uses a nature analogy for this. A domain is your core company network, let's say yourcompany.com. If your company acquires another business, you might create a new domain, and together they form a tree. Multiple trees link together to create an overarching forest. And binding this entire massive ecosystem together is DNS, the domain name system. Seriously, without DNS properly integrated into Active Directory, your computers literally wouldn't be able to find the domain controller to even ask for permission to log in. DNS is essentially the GPS for your corporate network.
Moving on to Section 5, Structuring OUs and Groups, Organizing the Chaos. We organize all of this using organizational units, or OUs. Think of OUs as the folders and subfolders within your company's Active Directory. You basically create OUs to mirror your actual business structure. For example, the HR department requires completely different security permissions, software deployments, and access rights than, say, the sales team. By placing all the HR employees and computers into a specific HR OU, IT administrators can apply security policies that are targeted strictly to that department without messing up anything for anyone else.
And inside those OUs, we use groups to manage access. Now, this brilliantly illustrates where a lot of beginners trip up. You basically have two categories to worry about: scope and type. The type is pretty straightforward. A security group is used to grant access to a file share or a printer, whereas a distribution group is strictly used for email lists, like when you need to email the whole department at once. But scope? Scope determines where the group can actually be used. Domain local is for resources in your specific domain, global is for organizing your users, and universal is for those massive organizations spanning across an entire forest. Getting these right is absolutely the secret to clean, headache-free permission management. All right, the final piece of the puzzle. Section 6, Users and Real-World Access, Populating the Network.
User creation is basically your bread and butter in an IT help desk role. Let's look at a real-world scenario, like onboarding a new employee. Let's call him Bob in accounting. You don't just type in his name and call it a day. You define a whole wealth of attributes: his phone number, his manager, his office location. You establish strict password policies that force him to change his temporary password on his very first login. And you assign his initial access rights so that on day one, Bob can actually sit down and get straight to work.
Let's move to and see how this all builds into our final hands-on lab flow. When you sit down at your virtual machine, here is what you're actually going to do. First, you'll lay down the folders. Create your OUs for IT, HR, and finance. Second, you'll build the access keys. Create security groups for things like finance data access. Third, you populate the network by creating your new users inside their respective OUs. And finally, the magic step, you assign those users to the groups. And just like that, boom, you have built a fully functional, secure organizational structure totally from scratch.
Honestly, by setting up this virtual lab, you are practicing the exact enterprise-level architecture used by Fortune 500 companies all around the globe. Mastering these foundational Active Directory skills is absolutely your ultimate stepping stone into a cybersecurity or systems administration career. But it really begs the question, if setting up these permissions from scratch is this complex, what legacy security flaws are quietly hiding in your own company's network right now, just waiting to be discovered?